Hi, my name is Ken Rose, and I'm a longtime a professor of religious studies, and I've written a number of books in the area. And I'm going to do something really old-fashioned this morning. Old-fashioned because I've just been taking a whirlwind course in how to use AI agents to create. I could create a new image of myself with a new voice and with a new face, and I could even have one of these systems. I could have Notebook, LLM, or Claude create a whole course for me. Give me the script, give me visuals, give me images, give me PowerPoint slides. It's just amazing what just Notebook can do. But I'm going to do something really old fashioned. Actually, I'm going to just make a video. And as you can see, there's nothing fancy about this video. I'm just sitting in a room in an ashram somewhere in Germany, and I just have a plain wall behind me. And I'm not going to make any effort to do anything different, because I had the insight that as interesting as all of those slides and videos and audio presentations and video avatars and audio avatars that I was able to create in this workshop over the last couple of days, what I felt was missing from all of that was something that only really a human being can bring to our spiritual life, and that is our own personal insight. Because we're not robots, we're not machines, we're not vectors of mathematical information that are able to generate plausible and even supremely plausible responses to prompts. As human beings, we're open to reality through our senses. We're open to reality through our mind. We're open to reality through our intuition. And especially our intuition, when it's spiritually refined, can open us out into a kind of consciousness that's eternal, that's blissful, and that certainly transcends the limitations and the time frame of these bodies in which we inhabit. Uh, That's a basically spiritual perspective on life. And it's possible that I know I could use some of these new tools to generate maybe a fancier video. But I do think that after a year or so of this, a lot of us are just going to want to go back to the old way where human beings interact with each other, where we learn, we read texts, we read books, whether we read them on digitally or not doesn't make any difference, but we actually read the old text and we engage with it spiritually, mentally, and intellectually. So that's what motivated me to suddenly just start recording this morning. I have a Substack. I've written a number of books. I've lectured. I lectured at universities for many years. But most fundamentally, what got me on the path that I'm on is that I'm a yogi and a spiritual practitioner, a contemplative. And I've been at this since I was a teenager. That's already in the 1960s. So that's over 50 years ago. And what I have learned over the years, I've encapsulated in courses that I've taught over the years. It's called the Mystic Quest, or I'll just update it a bit, the Mystical Quest. And what I would like to do in the next series of videos, which I'll post on YouTube, and I'm probably going to use them at my Substack, is that I want to talk about how the spiritual life unfolds. I want to talk about a kind of roadmap of the spiritual life. The Latin term is itinerarium, itineraries. We get the English word itinerary from that. That's a little bit remote from our experience. I think roadmap actually really helps, or just a map, the path that we should follow. Now, a first response to that might be, look, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. I don't need a roadmap or a path because there really is no path. It's the pathless path. And I'm familiar with all of that, and I've tried to walk the pathless path myself as well. And what I've often discovered is that I still need a path. I need a pathfinder, I need a guide. And because if I walk on the pathless path for too long, then I find myself just back to who I always was. Maybe a little bit better, but still basically the same person that I was before. So I would argue against anyone who might say that there is no path. You're already awakened. You're already enlightened. You're already saved. There's nothing that you need to do. I would say that, yes, that's actually true, but we might not realize it in the day-to-day tumult of our everyday lives. And so what I'd like to do over the next few lectures is to unfold for you the spiritual path as I see it. Another reason to talk about roadmaps or spiritual roadmaps is that we live in a time of extraordinary opportunity to explore virtually every spiritual path that's ever been put down in writing or which still has a teaching tradition. On all sides, we have movements and institutions and teachers and YouTube videos and workshops and ashrams and religious communities and spiritual groups and online gurus. It's all there for us. We could spend the whole day, and I know people, even here in an ashram, that spend half the day looking at teachers on YouTube, and that's all great. But one problem can be that is that because the institutions that used to harbor mystics and contemplatives and people of deep spirituality have, for the most part, vanished and dissolved. The result of that is that we often don't have anybody to give us personal, individual guidance or direction. We don't know what the next step on the spiritual path is. We don't even know that there are steps. And if there are steps, we might not even know how to recognize them. We don't know what the steps are. So, what I want to do in the next couple of lectures is to try to chart my own itinerary, which I've developed over time, in light of other itineraries. Most notably, for instance, the path of a mystical contemplation that has been outlined by the manualists of the Catholic tradition, the Roman Catholic tradition over the last few centuries. The manualists are mostly forgotten right now. I mean, even the word manualist doesn't really inspire a lot of inspiration when people hear it. You know, a manual, it's like a handbook that tells you how to do something. It's like the manuals that used to come with our computers. They don't even come any longer. You know, in our phone, there's somewhere in the eye you can find the manual in the phone, but who looks at it? You just Google it, or you can even just ask Claude, or don't waste your tokens. You can just ask Gemini for that. And you get an answer. So manual sounds very old fashioned and stuffy, but you know, in a way, old fashioned and stuffy, I think is going to come back into style. I read a story in the New York Times the other day that a lot of young people are using slang from a century ago, like yap. Yap. That's something my grandfather would have said. Yap. That's great. And a lot of young people today too, you see them, they're sitting with actual books and they're reading physical books. And I think that the AI tsunami that's overwhelming us is going to force a lot of us back to some of the basics, because we're going to get tired pretty quickly of AI slop when you can recognize, like, for instance, an image that's been generated by AI. At first, you're amazed, and then slowly you see, oh, yeah, I can see that was generated by an AI agent. And it would be the same thing with any prose that could be generated. Because what would be lacking would be if I can get Gemini or ChatGPT to write a poem for me, which was one of the things people did when they first discovered AI a few years back. That's great, but a great poet, a poet whose soul, whose heart, whose mind is in contact with the deepest mysteries of life, the kind of language that can generate, or the kind of music that can generate. I think as human beings, we'll always be able to detect that difference. We'll know the difference. And so that's why I think that it's going to become even more important as time goes on for us to kind of retain our ability to feel, to think, and to experience the deeper truths of reality. I think that's going to become a skill in demand, even more so than it has been in the past. Some say it could even lead to the revival of the humanities. And what I hope is that it leads to a revival of interest in some of the great spiritual teachers of the past. So I mentioned manuals already, and I'll have a lot more to say about them because I'm really partial to the manuals that were developed by mostly forgotten mystical theologians in the Catholic Church over the from around the year 1600 to around the year 1900. And after that, it drops off. Um, and in order to understand why that happened, we have to understand that there was a great flowering of mysticism in Spain in the 16th century. Among the Carmelites, among John of the and the leading figures, of course, were John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, and their their maps of the spiritual life became the basis for a new science of mysticism that in the Catholic Church was called mystical theology, an experiential, experimental theology that's designed to help the contemplative to become open to the infusion of divine grace and knowledge, and also to be able to progress in that. And so this gave rise to these various manuals. And what's at the heart of the manuals is is the development of a taxonomy of a series of stages, a path, a map of the steps that occur on the spiritual path as you go from kind of initial awakening into the spiritual life, and as you progress through the purificatory processes that are essential to the spiritual life. There is a path, and you're just not there unless perhaps you became enlightened in a previous life. The purificatory processes, the basic disciplines that are required to progress to the point where one begins to live steadily in the divine presence, and one can live from the divine presence. So that's one itinerary that I'll be referring to as we go along. And another, I won't say as much about the others. I'll say more about them in later videos. Another comes from the Yoga Sutra. And a lot of people who practice yoga are familiar with the Yoga Sutra. But unless you've made an in-depth study of the Yoga Sutra, you probably would not be aware of the subtle mapping of the progressive stages of samadhi, or of mystical union, that are described very, very telegraphically, almost like in a series of tweets. I don't know what they're still called. They're still called tweets on X. A series of short aphorisms. And they're so packed with meaning that it actually requires reading commentaries to understand. And then the third map that I will look at is from a Buddhist text from about 1500 years ago. It's called the Visuddhimagga. And if you've understood to some degree the Visuddhimagga, it actually clarifies the Yoga Sutra. So it can actually almost serve as a commentary on those mysterious passages in the Yoga Sutra. Excuse me. So those are the three. Those are the three that I'm going to be working with. If we were doing this live, I would say this is a great time for questions because I've been talking for a long time. So I'm going to put this up on YouTube, so I'm sure there'll be some opportunity for questions and comments there. I will also upload it to my Substack and maybe even eventually create a transcript. Couldn't write a book based on this because it's been brewing within me for a long time that I do need to write a book about this topic. And I know writing books is old-fashioned right now. I could probably ask Claude, and it could write the book in an hour or so, but it wouldn't be the same. It just wouldn't be the same. It would be like asking Claude to write a book in the style of the late Thomas Merton, or it just wouldn't be the same as actually reading a book by Thomas Merton. Okay, so as we move on today, I'm going to speak for another 10 minutes or so. And I know I've heard today that people like long form podcasts actually more than the short ones because people are listening as they go about their business. And I'll try to get this up as a podcast as well. I just want to, I can't share my screen because I'm just using a simple camera, but I will post it somewhere so you'll be able to see it. And I want to take a look at my chart of the spiritual life, the itinerary that I've developed. You can see this, but I will post it so that you'll be able to see it. And if this really takes off, then I'll invest in some editing programs and get it a little bit more spiffy. There's an old word that nobody uses any longer. Get a little bit more up to date. All right, good. So please, any questions or comments, I'll be delighted to see them. And I'm going to put this on my YouTube channel. So if you want to subscribe or hit the bell button, that's also great. All right, so my itinerary is named the 15 Stages on the Spiritual Path. 15 stages or steps on the spiritual path. And 15 sounds like a lot, I know, but it helps us get a more fine-grained understanding of what actually goes on when we move from the first stages of spiritual awakening to the higher levels. Now, I think it might help in order to understand what I'm going to talk about to look at a very old mystical itinerary that is part of Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic mystical theology. And according to this old map, it's a very simple map, it's easy to remember. The spiritual life is broken up into three main stages. And the first stage is called purgation, purgatio in Latin, and we can modernize that to purification. The path, the stage of purification. And the second stage is labeled illumination, illuminatio in Latin, illumination, mystical illumination. And then finally, the third stage is named union, unio, mystical union. So we have three stages: purification, illumination, and union. And so this is the basic framework that allows us to plug in many of the phases in the 15 that I'm going to point out, and gives the 15 stages a logical underlying order, which you will be able to see. I was teaching this the other night in a seminar, and after someone looked at the 15 stages for a few minutes, they said, "Oh, I see a pattern there." I said, "Yes, what's the pattern?" She said, "It looks like there's like a positive and then a negative phase, and then it repeats itself." I said, "Exactly right. It repeats itself. Even though there are 15 stages, they're really only aspects or variations on two themes." And she said, "Well, what are those two themes?" And I said, "The two themes are purification and illumination, purgation and enlightenment, purgation and enlightenment." So purification and illumination. So let's think about that triad that I just gave you: purgation or purification. Let's update the language slightly. Purification, illumination, and union. And so let's think of union as just illumination perfected, and so that reduces the three to two. So actually, the three get reduced to two through a process of simplification. It's actually easier to understand the underlying principle then that governs the spiritual life in every tradition with which I'm familiar. You might say, "Well, what's that?" Now you have me sitting on the edge of my seat, I hope. And basically, it's an alternation between periods of purification and periods of illumination. And this continues throughout the whole spiritual life from the very beginning, which may, for some of you, have begun with an extraordinary experience of sudden illumination. And for others, it may have been a difficult phase in your life, which turned out to be quite purifying. It helped you to change behavior, or to change places, or to change even people in your life that were no longer serviceable for your spiritual growth. That was a period of purification. And if it started with an illumination, that was a period of illumination. But inevitably, as we progress, our illuminations fade, and then periods of purification return. But purifications inevitably end in illuminations. So that's the the oscillating pattern that we'll see throughout these videos as I go through these 15 stages on the spiritual path. So one point I do want to make about the threefold pattern that I mentioned before is that it's not indigenous to Christianity, but it actually goes back to Neoplatonic philosophy. So it's before Christianity. And the spiritual tradition of Plato mixed with Aristotle that culminates in Plotinus. It gave people a real spiritual discipline and a spiritual orientation. And it was in this tradition that these three stages were first articulated in Greek. And the words are lovely in Greek, and they're somewhat reminiscent of English words. And so the stage of purification in Greek is called catharsis. And I think that actually, in English for us, expresses even more clearly what purification is about. Catharsis, cleansing, cleansing. And the second stage was elampsis, which means basically you can almost hear an English word, lamp. Elampsis, illumination, illumination. And then the third stage is henosis, which means unification, oneness. So those are the three stages in Greek. And when this video is just about over now, and I don't want to go on for too long, I'll look forward to any comments that you have. I will post the 15 stages, and let's see, as an assignment for our next video, let's see if you can break those 15 stages down up into the three deeper stages of purification or cleansing. Cleansing is probably the best. Cleansing, illumination, and unification or union. Well, I thank you for your time today, and I look forward to presenting more of these videos in the future. So everyone, I wish you a good afternoon and be well.